Alrighty, fans, welcome to the second edition of Wrestletalk. Got a lot to talk about today, some interesting stats to talk about on the way the national wrestling scene is going.
Yeah, lately, the last 2 weeks, Raw has been having 3-hour Raws.
They have.
I just looked on a website that tracks the amount of wrestling that actually takes place in those shows.
Okay.
What would you think takes place in 3 hours of Raw?
Hour and a half.
See, I would have guessed an hour and 45 minutes.
Yes.
44 minutes of wrestling in 3-hour Raws.
Seriously?
Yes.
That is ridiculous.
And the sad thing is, TNA's Impact Wrestling
Yes.
is not really any better
Okay.
It was, I believe, 30 minutes
in 2 hours.
in 2 hours of programming.
Well, that seems reasonable.
SmackDown was the big winner, I guess you would say, with 39 minutes in 2 hours. But there was total, counting Superstars and Next, there was 9 hours of wrestling programming this week. 152 minutes of actual wrestling.
In 9 hours.
So that's less than 3 hours.
I would say that's 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's 2.5 hours and 2 minutes. 2 hours and 32 minutes of wrestling in 9 hours of programming.
Now, okay, and granted, in 9 hours of programming, you're looking at how many commercials, would you say?
You're going to have 10 minutes an hour in commercials on the average.
So, an hour and a half of commercials, which still leaves 7.5 hours of programming and 2.5 hours. So, there's 5 hours of programming on wrestling.
That's how much the focus went to out of the ring stuff. And that's one of wrestling's biggest problems, and they don't see it.
I mean, it baffles me. I mean, grew up in the territory era. Continental. Every Sunday morning, rushed home from church, sometimes skipped meals. I know that's hard to believe coming from me. To make sure I caught all of Continental Wrestling. It was an hour-long show, usually shot in an arena in Alabama. Every now and then they'd tape in Knoxville, but for the most part in Alabama, and probably in that hour-long show, 50 minutes, there was probably 30 to 35 minutes of wrestling.
Well, I mean, you would occasionally get interviews. Of course, with any wrestling, you've always had interviews. Lasted around 2 to 4 minutes each, and there would maybe be 2 to 3 in an hour-long episode. Or there would be other stunts sometimes, like, the famous Doug Furnace bench press record that he always tried to break.
And then Lord Humongous.
Lord Humongous, who later became known as Sid Vicious, would rush down to the ring in the Civic Coliseum, and he would always slam the barbell down on Doug's chest.
I was there for at least 2 of those.
Gordon Solie would be outraged by it.
Yeah.
Gordon was the king. The rest of the show was wrestling.
I mean, they were able to tell their story in the ring, where it should be.
And, if there was an interview, it was as likely as not to be breaking out into a fight. There's lots of classic Flair, Steamboat, ringside fights, they end up in the ring, though.
There was times, I remember specifically, Tom Pritchard had all of a sudden become the hero. Almost unheard of. I mean, long-time villain in the Continental area. Started feuding with the Dirty White Boy. The Dirty White Girl came out looking as if this was just unheard of at the time. Because the Dirty White Boy had been smacking her around. It's probably one of wrestling's earlier domestic violence angles. Probably the first that didn't involve the Macho Man. And, she came out to him, and they were talking about it was only to set up the Dirty White Boy to jump him from behind. Because she stood by her man, no matter how much he slapped her around.
It's just, now you have just so much time spent following wrestlers all over the back of the arena while they look for somebody, or, just as you come upon them having a conversation in the back alley or the back hallway or something like that.
As long as I went to wrestling, as long as I've attended events at the Knoxville Civic Coliseum, it wasn't until less than 10 years ago I had any idea what the back side of the Coliseum looked like. Because they just didn't do that crap.
Oh, you never saw behind the scenes like that.
Every now and then you would have a locker room cam where somebody had been jumped in the locker room, and there was one where the Horsemen just took out the Midnight Express.
Occasionally you'd have Falls Count Anywhere matches that would happen in, but you never used to see the wrestlers out there without a ring interviewer.
Yeah, or at least, you know,
somebody like that.
Either they would be interviewed in the ring, or there would be a podium set up on a stage area where, in Continental's case, Gordon Solie.
Now, if you're live, if you go to a SmackDown, Raw, I don't know, some TNA taping live, you have to watch the video screen and see what is going on in the back.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's just, to me, it takes so much away.
That honestly surprised me, you know. 44 minutes and 3 hours is ridiculous.
I mean, and on the local level, I can't imagine, you know, if I was trying to shoot a show, you know, like we used to do. Right. And granted, we were shooting in tiny buildings, but can you imagine having somebody with a camera running all over, say, old West LaFollette School trying to shoot things?
No.
This is the problem. There's just too much technology in wrestling now. Usually you shot on about 2 or 3 cameras. You know, now you have, you know, somebody that's the equivalent of, we'll say, rising star Mark Charles, running around with a camera, taping everything that goes on in the back.
Every person has their own camera and their own microphone now. And frankly, a lot of guys, those guys don't need a microphone. They need the mouth of the south and the bottom in it.
They also get their own gimmick world heavyweight title belt too.
Yeah, how many conventions have we been to that have seen, you know, everybody has the big gold belt?
Everyone you go
yeah.
to.
I mean, Bushwhacker Luke and the Honky Tonk Man both have them. But, you know, the whole wrestlers on the microphone thing. Now, there was a time that, I'll use Bam Bam Bigelow, for example. Bam Bam could do some pretty great stuff in the ring. Bam Bam, for his size, was just an innovator. Bam Bam was one of the worst talkers of his day. You know, when early on he had Larry Sharp as a manager. And then later when he went to WWF, I miss when it was called that, they had the surprise and had Sir Oliver Humperdinck come in as the big kahuna and be his manager. Then later on, when he was in ECW, he had Shane Douglas, one of the great mouths of his time, as the spokesmouth for that group. Plus they had Francine and Sonny to take away from the fact that Bam Bam wasn't a great talker. When he goes to WCW, they put him with Dallas Page. They knew his limitations back then. Today, Bam Bam would have a mic, probably out talking on Raw.
Essentially, the only person now who has a speaker for him is the great Khali, and he pretty much doesn't speak English.
Yeah. You know, and Dolph Ziggler has Vicky. And, of course, Alberto Del Rio has his ring announcer, but Alberto Del Rio talks on his own.
He's very good at it, too.
Yeah, he's probably the best all-around wrestler in WWE right now.
You know, Sin Cara, they hyped him heavily. He really doesn't seem to have made an impact at all.
No, he's I mean, he's good, I guess.
I don't think he even had a match at the last pay-per-view.
He didn't. In fact, he had a match with Chavo, who we'll get to some stuff on Chavo shortly too, that was just considered a disappointment. And it's hard to have a disappointing match with Chavo.
Oh, no, the Guerreros are great wrestlers in the ring.
I mean, Chavo's, up until recently, was one of the longest tenured wrestlers in WWE. He literally has been there since the WCW buyout.
Right.
He actually lasted longer than any WCW star, as far as I know, that made the transition.
The Guerreros, they had the great thing going when Eddie was still alive. And even a few years ago, Chavo and Vicky together were really good when he was feuding with Mysterio. But they stopped using him just effectively at all and made sort of a joke out of it.
Yep. Pat and I were talking earlier about the legendary storyline between Chavo and Saturn in WCW.
Great stuff.
That was great. I mean, I remember it was in Knoxville even when they kind of came that storyline, that feud came to a head. It was in the Civic Center.
It was. I mean, it was just Chavo was so good, and now he's unemployed. That's the big thing about Chavo right now. They let him go.
He said that he felt they weren't using him properly anymore, and just essentially taking him off most of the cards. He rarely ever even had a match, which, because of the lack of wrestling now, you only get matches at house shows. You don't get matches on TV anymore unless you're just, unless you're going to be in their pay-per-view wrestling for a title. You don't get TV matches anymore.
No, and that's another one of the things that's wrong. Now Chavo is in a lot better position than almost anybody else.
Right.
Chavo could go to TNA. Eric Bischoff, a lot of people don't like him, loves the cruiserweights, and Chavo's an established star.
Chavo's great. He's great. He's great with a microphone in his hand. He's great in the ring. And the Guerreros have always been that way.
Now Chavo also has the option. He could easily go back to Mexico and compete in AAA or EMLL, the Lucha Libre promotions.
And be big.
Yeah, I mean, he would be like the prodigal son returning home.
Yeah.
And he's established enough and can work that style. Chavo could go to Japan and just make the big money. So he has options.
He'd be a rock star in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, the people of Japan still get actual wrestling too.
Right.
Same thing in Mexico.
You want to see some good wrestling? Look up some the Japanese stuff online. It's some good stuff. It's good wrestling. They're high flyers, a lot of excitement, and they got the technical aspect of wrestling down, and that's what they rely on.
Well, Hulk Hogan was the IWGP champion.
Mm-hmm.
He once said that he valued that belt greater than his WWF title belt at the time, which caused a lot of controversy when he said it.
Oh, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was actually kind of shut out of most media.
To be the champion of Japan was a huge deal, though.
I mean, it was very rare for anybody just to be able to go over and take those titles. I mean, you had some people that should have been big stars over here. That could have been big stars over here. Stan the Lariat Hansen comes to mind. And he had a good run in the AWA briefly. But man, they literally worship him in Japan the way we would a Michael Jordan.
Well, folks like it's the Ultimo Dragon.
Man.
In Japan, huge. Mexico, huge. He comes here, they barely WCW had a good run with the Ultimo Dragon. But afterwards, have we even seen him since the buyout? No.
I mean, 7 titles at once. He held the J Crown.
Right. He's just awesome in the ring. He's great.
Just going to assume it's because he probably lacks the ability to speak English as well as he probably would need to be that
right
intensive in the WWE at the time, which is obviously became nothing but scripted.
Yeah.
Well, fans, we're about to wrap up this particular segment of Sports Chat. Of Wrestle Talk. We'll be back with segment 2 in just a bit.